share share my presentation, which is helpfully halfway through. Sorry, I'll go back to the beginning. So yeah, I'm just going to really set the scene, hopefully, for some of the presentations that are going to follow later on in this session. And what I'm going to do is just spend a few minutes giving a very brief introduction to the concept of linked open data and to schema.org, which are heavily used in the Ocean Info Hub project that Lucy just mentioned there, and we'll be hearing about in a few moments' time. But first of all, really, I wanted to take the idea of structured data on the web and think about why we're actually thinking about these issues. Why are we talking about structuring how we put our information on the web? Why can't we just kind of carry on using some of the XML techniques that we've seen already today, or putting other documents up on the web? And really, I think it's a little bit difficult to see, I'm afraid, but I'll use the pointer. Really, I'm thinking here we're talking about the FAIR principles that I think you'll all be aware of. And some of these principles that I think will be addressed by talking about structured data on the web include things like having rich metadata, really about standardizing how the metadata are communicated, by standardizing the vocabularies that we're using to make things more interoperable. Obviously, I'm going to talk about linked metadata in talking about linked open data, thinking about metadata having multiple attributes, thinking about really putting a good usage license on our metadata, and really thinking as well that we have community standards around some of these things too. The usage license thing is really going back as well to something that Connor Delaney said on the first day of this workshop as well. So if you're talking about open data, really make sure you get your licensing right and obvious. So these particular techniques, linked open data and schema.org, they're going to use standard web technologies and techniques to publish, in particular, metadata in an open way on the web. But instead of being structured around how you or I might consume that information, how we might read it from a web page or visualize it in a map, we're talking about sharing the information in a way that a computer can understand, and a software agent is going to understand the metadata in a more deep and rich way. So that's really why we're interested in some of these things. And it goes back to Tim Berners-Lee and the invention of the web. Quite early on in the web, he was talking about these concepts, and the quote on the left there is one of the things that really strikes me about how he was thinking about the web. If HTML and the web make all the online documents look like a huge book, structured data on the web will make all the data in the world look like one huge database. And when we're scattered across the world, working away in our own organizations and on our own projects, having an approach that lets us connect our data together in a way like this is really important. So around linked data, there are kind of 4 principles, and these have been around since 2006. So this is nothing new that we're talking about here. The first one is that you use web addresses as the name of things. So often this is kind of a uniform resource identifier, and it means that I, as Adam Leadbetter, get a web address. And I guess to a certain extent, that's why I was asking Ben about the use of the ORC IDs for the researchers in their data catalog. That would give a web address as a name for a person. And then you want to use an HTTP web address, just a standard HTTP web address, like you probably put into your browser, or the link that you clicked on in your browser to join the meeting today, so that things can be looked up. And now we're moving into using kind of uniform resource locators. And when someone looks up a web address, the idea is that you use standards to give them back some structured information. Now, when a browser looks up a web address, the standard that it gives back its structured information in is HTML, so that it can render it and we can read it. For the linked data, the standard is RDF, the resource description framework. We'll come back to that in a little bit, but there's also a query language. So just like SQL is the structured query language for databases, then Sparkle is the structured query language for RDF. And then the idea is that you insert links to other web addresses so that you're creating linked metadata. And you can then allow your users to discover more and new things by following through exactly what it is that the link that's in your structured data that you're putting out on the web. And related to the 4 principles of linked data are the 5 stars of linked open data. So this is a kind of cartoon that talks through that. At the bottom of the scale is sticking up a PDF of your data online. It's a online, but it's in a closed format. Then by, say, taking that PDF and converting it into something like an Excel file, now it's a bit more machine readable. It's not just a kind of bitmap. Then you want to improve it further, you go to an open format. In the case of the Excel file, you go to CSV. And then you put your URIs in, your web addresses, and you start publishing out RDF, and you go to 4 stars. And to go to 5 stars, then you create all your links in there. One of the ways to do that is to use vocabulary terms from services, or provide links to other people's information that is related to yours. Or a bit like we were saying before, providing a link to the ORC ID starts to build that linked data graph. And there's a project at LOD Cloud that kind of maps this out. I obviously don't expect you to read that, but you can go away and have a look at it, and you can see kind of a lot of these linked data resources that are already online. And there are some in our own kind of marine data sphere that are there. The kind of cyany blue up here is to do with geography as well. So we have links in there. So I mean, I don't want to get too techy, but it's useful to think about kind of some of the standards here and how some of this works as well. So RDF is a triple-based graph model, which is how it provides those links. Everything has a subject or an object, and those are nodes in kind of that linked data graph. And then the predicate is a link between them. And so you can come up with ideas like the ocean is color blue, and that's a kind of RDF triple type statement. And Sparkle, the query language, lets you just kind of have an expression where it says, well, tell me what has color, and asking that triple that we came up with before, what has is color as a predicate, would give us back the ocean and the blue. And there's an encoding language, the terse triple language, which you quite often see, where those strings would be written out and you get a little dot on the end to say that's the end of my statement. That's not really all that important, but we'll have to skip through a few things here. So we're going to skip just through a few slides there, sorry, just to talk about things like vocabularies. So we have a list of terms to constrain a field, taxonomies, where we have multiple vocabularies where you get a hierarchy going through them. And then you might hear terms like ontology, where you get formal definitions of types and classes, attributes and relationships. So some linked data resources that you might come across, things like the NERC vocabulary server, where there's a vocabulary of units of measure. Taxonomy, if you're talking about biology, then the World Register of Marine Species is an online taxonomy, quite literally, in terms of biology. And then there's plenty of ontologies where they describe these things in more detail, OBO being one of them. Okay, so then you can take some of that ideas and put it into JSON as well, and start putting all your links together. So there's a linked data version of Wikipedia, DBpedia, where you can put your resources in, and you can say, now I'm going to use a vocabulary, a specific vocabulary, schema.org, to describe this thing. And color from schema.org is now defined. So schema.org is a specific vocabulary that we can use to start having an interoperable conversation around some of these resources. So if it can fit into the ontology definition above. You also might think of it a little bit like a language like Esperanto that's been kind of come up with, so that there's a common language that we can use to describe lots of entities online, lots of patterns for person, place, creative work, organization. And creative work itself has a subclass called dataset, which is of particular importance as we come to talk about Ocean Info Hub. You might well have seen schema.org in use without realizing it. If you've ever done a search in Google and you've come up with some of these rich snippets where the search result is enhanced by certain content, particularly if you're searching for maybe train times or plane times or movie showings or movie results. They're very enhanced by schema.org. And schema.org can be serialized in lots of different ways. So it can be put into web pages, either inside the HTML tags or as JSON, or you can actually just output it as RDF, as we showed at the beginning. So you might get at the top of an HTML page something like this long JSON that's describing in schema.org a music event that's happening in Chicago, telling you that it's exactly what it is, telling you a little bit about how to buy tickets that are going to cost you $40 US, and it comes from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Just very quickly though, to warn, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to be as expressive as a lot of the metadata models that are very specific to a domain. And also, so yeah, just to say there's a few resources out there, like Science on Schema that the Science Information Partnership have put out. The Irish Spatial Data Exchange has done a lot of work in this area as well, taking DCAT records and converting them into schema.org. And in CDataNet in the European Union, we've mapped a lot of these things on as well. I guess one of the weaknesses at the moment is the tooling around publishing these records in the workflows, and that's a little bit of a discussion that we'll come back to later on. So I realize I've run out of time, so I'm going to stop there and just show leave this slide for a second and show that there's some resources that are available, and I will pop the content of this slide into the chat in a second as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Adam. That was great for setting the scene to this session. Insights into structured data on the web and schema.org. We do have a few extra minutes. So are there any questions for Adam before we move on? I think throughout the session, if anyone does have any suggestions or questions, please put them in the chat, because then we can pick them up in the discussion time. I think Adam will put his links into the chat, which would be great. I see there's one question in the chat from, okay, it's a general question from Sharon. Great introduction to structured data for non-specialists. Thank you. Will these presentations be available after the workshop? Yes, I think the answer to that is a definite yes. We'll also have recordings available, and these will be made. I think if you go back to the ICANN 9 website, you'll get links to those. I'll share the link again to the meeting in the chat. And Adam has shared the content of his resources slide with those very useful links. Great. Thanks, Adam. So back to you.
Super. So thank you, Lucy. So I'm